Welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Axion,
I'm Sint.
and we are continuing through Undertale and our discussion of Mossflower by Brian Jacques.
So, last time we talked a fair bit about the different types of leaders represented by the three Green Eyes cats, and how specifically the late Lord Green Eyes, Radaga, falls into the category of the good tyrant. Now, the not super great leader who's still okay-ish enough that he manages to stave off any overt rebellion. Because rebellion is not just a switch you can flip. There's a lot that has to go into one if it has any prayer of being successful. And if you're going to lead a rebellion, you want it to be successful because do you know what they do to people who don't do rebellions properly?
Usually make them dead.
Yeah. So, that's kind of what we're talking about today because, well, Green Eyes, as we mentioned, doesn't last the whole story, and we get an actual tyrant who doesn't know how to do her job, Tsarmina, who does just basically run in straight into provoking open rebellion because she immediately makes things too harsh for there to be an alternative. So, how do you do a rebellion?
Well, you need people. That's the biggest thing. You need people, and you need them in pretty decent numbers. You need resources, you need a safe headquarters or three, you need trust among your members, you need security that you are not going to be undermined by the powers you're opposing. You need access to information. You need a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And for most of us, our primary exposure to such things is through fiction. Uh, revolutions and resistance movements are they're the stuff of that so many stories are made up of that we spend our time with as far as with entertainment, especially with video games, fantasy novels, things like that. Here we are.
So, we're not going straight to the pacifist ending, huh?
Oh, we are. This is part of the process.
Oh,
We have
right.
to do this first.
Okay. I forgot. Like I said, it's been a hot minute since I've played through. But yeah, so you can't just decide, I'm done with this and I need to do a rebellion. You need to do a lot of planning, and as mentioned, there's every risk that the planning's going to fall apart halfway through just because of, betrayal. It takes one informant in your rebellion to kill the whole thing. Usually. So, the Mossflower Woodlanders need to be very careful about how they go about things. So they fairly wisely decide that step one is getting a steadier source of information. Because, well, I'm a virus. I forgot he did that. If you're going up against a better armed and better fortified enemy, which is pretty much always the case with a rebellion, you need your rebellion is going to live or die on the information you have to act on. So they turn to Chib, a fairly mercenary Robin, and basically bribe him with candy to get him to spy for them.
You're just a little bit too easily provoked, aren't you, Undyne?
A little bit. So, yeah. The Woodlanders are also, not trained soldiers. This is the case in pretty much every Redwall story we run into. They're just normal people, well, normal animals, but they have a few people who are good at fighting. The rest of them are kind of learning as they go. There's a little bit more of a skew toward the warrior in this one, just because they've been in a rebellion for some time, because Tsarmina keeps picking fights with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they exactly have the safety of Redwall Abbey to retreat to, because this is, again, a prequel. So you have Bella of Brockhall, who is just basically there to come in and break things when they need to be broken. Skipper of Otters, who's basically in charge of a lot of the fighting to begin with. Lady Amber, who's going to hide in the trees and snipe you because she's a squirrel and that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention, we've got our little tricks and traps. We've got the moles, who are maybe not as great on the overt fighting, but they are the engineers of doom who are going to find a way to destroy your castle without having to lift a finger in terms of battle. Don't diss the engineers. Oh, okay. I forgot how silly this was. The blatantly correct choice. But yeah, so they're working at a disadvantage. But they do also have a couple of other rogue agents here. One is Gaunt, who, as we mentioned before, is a thief who kind of just breaks in and out of Cotier because it's funny and irritates the wildcats, and also gives the Woodlanders more supplies. And Martin, the newcomer to the area, who is purportedly a warrior but doesn't feel like one without his sword. Which I can talk about that later, but
The Mosslanders have at least a partial advantage because they have several people among their number who have a culture among them that facilitates them being part of a resistance movement. As you mentioned, the squirrels and the moles and also the otters all have their own unique traditions and talents that, when combined with the Mossflower Rebellion group, are really useful and helpful. And a lot of that really kind of helps them in ways that a lot of real-world resistance groups might not have the same kind of access to. Like, imagine if you were trying to put together a real-world resistance group, and you just so happened to have the convenience of an access to a group that spends, like, just as a cultural thing, a ton of time doing, like, guerrilla tactics of moving through trees and practicing archery and being really good at navigating in woodlands, and another group that's like a demolition team with digging machinery and construction equipment, and then another group that's a trained and highly skilled semi-aquatic assault force.
this kind of has the vibes of, like, and put it in D&D terms, we're going to try and starve out the halflings. You know, the halflings, who are mostly known for being a very domestic race and very good cooks, and will have a supply of food. Those elves will have to come down from the trees eventually.
Those dwarves will eventually need to come out of that hole.
Look, we're just gonna try and fight. We're just gonna try and come up with better weapons than the dwarves, and more creative things than the gnomes. We'll try to outbreed the humans. Sorry, where the humans are kind of the baseline, so I had to come up with something for them.
I was about to say, if you're going to go with outbreed, you want to go with something like orcs or goblins.
Those are typically not, but and most DMs are going to say those aren't core, so you can't play them.
Okay, fair. But point being, Mossflower pretty much has exactly the kind of forces they need to pull off this kind of resistance effort, and it's all cultural. Because it's just a culture thing for squirrels to train in archery and practice, pardon me, stealthy movement through treetops and being able to travel long distances without ever touching the ground. It's a cultural thing for otters to be skilled aquatic to land and freshwater combatants who combine their ability to swim and hold their breath for really long time with natural advantages like claws and stuff and their own natural size and agility and combat ability. And then moles, obviously moles throughout the Redwall series, their primary thing is they dig and they build things. And that's an immensely useful skill for a resistance group that is trying to manipulate the terrain, which is something that any good resistance group would want to be able to do, because there's nothing more helpful than turning the landscape against your opponent, which is what the Mossflower group does eventually. They get the lay of the land from the squirrels and from Chib, and they put together that Kotir is down in a depression that used to be a lake, and they eventually figure out how to flood it again by temporarily damming the River Moss by sinking their own ship.
And I do want to say also that this is fairly realistic for once in terms of how resistances tend to go, in that they know they can't last. This is a war of attrition, and they're eventually going to be ground down if they can't do something about it, which is why Bella sends Martin and company on a quest to get Boar to come help. That doesn't work, but as we mentioned back in Redwall, yeah, we also get the legendary Sword of Martin the Warrior, but the real benefit is the fact that we picked up a freaking army. We got all the ore slaves from Ripfang's ship to come and help us liberate Mossflower, so we have a nice safe place we can all live. So yeah, if you have a rebellion and you know you are in the moral right, you need to convince allies that you are in the moral right and have them come help you. Otherwise, you're not going to win. You know who else learned this lesson? The Americans. We would not have won the revolution without the help of France.
Yep. And then we kind of turned around and, culturally at least, kind of trashed on them ever since.
That's because, historically speaking, the average person has the attention span of a goldfish, so our oldest ally is no longer backing us perfectly. We can complain about them. When honestly, what we should probably do is complain about the fact that we only got involved in Vietnam at their behest, as a part of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, with the whole containment system for communism, even though that was basically a former colony working to keep a colony as a colony. But, you know, that's not really relevant to talking about little mice with swords, is it? But like, if we're gonna trash on France, we should do it for that and not for, you know, opposing involvement in like Iraq.
Yeah. Also, Undyne, what the heck?
Undyne learned to cook from Josh.
I don't think Josh usually makes that much of a mess.
I don't know. I mean, have you seen the Mythical Kitchen?
Yes. There you go. There's a competition.
I want to see Undyne make the sub 10-minute burger challenge. Anyway, the logistics of rebellion also have to pay a toll against, you know, the aggressor, like the one who's causing the rebellion to have to exist in the first place, because, well, the rebellion exists based on whether or not they think they have a chance to take them out, so they have to watch the tactics of the tyrannical government very closely to have any prayer of being effective in the slightest. And they find their own tactics to do that. Tsarmina quickly takes advantage of the fact that she can she has captured a couple of their children because she knows that the Woodlanders do not want any harm to come to their children. So she uses that as a lever against them. The Woodlanders respond by having Mask slip in disguised as a fox, who quickly gets promoted to captain because Tsarmina has an HR problem.
Tsarmina is an HR problem.
Okay, but when you're approaching the tyrant to tell them why their empire is crumbling, you kind of have to approach it with like passive voice stuff, so you have enough time to get to the door and slam it before they can throw a knife at you. But yeah, it's ultimately the logistics wear down against Kotir as well, because it actually does come up toward the end when Bane and his mercenaries show up that the freshly arrived mercenaries are well fed and happy. Tsarmina's regulars are worn down and starving because the food supplies run so low. So, yeah, logistics of a rebellion. It affects both sides of the conflict. Even if you're starting out with an advantage, if the conflict goes on long enough and they manage to get you in the right position, you're eventually going to be backed into a corner, one way or another. So, yeah, that's, I think, all I had to really say on that.
Can we get out of the fire now?
No, it's dramatic. I don't think that's how friends work Undone.
I don't know. It's not the weirdest form of friendship I've ever seen.
Thanks for burning my house down. Don't kill the king or I'm going to beat you up.
I forgot the house cries.
I mean, it's on fire, wouldn't you?
See y'all next time.
Bye.